Do you want to know more about people's journeys and understand how they take decisions and solve problems in their day-to-day lives? Tune in to the Nails and Hammers podcast to master from what others have already figured out in life. Our guest for today is the former India cricketer Snehal Pradhan, who is now a sports writer, broadcaster, and a YouTuber. Hi Snehal, welcome to the Nails and Hammers podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we begin, IPL just concluded or was suspended. So, can you share your three favorite moments from the IPL?
Three favorite moments. Do they have to be playing moments?
Any moments?
Well, one of my favorite moments was being involved with the IPL on the commentary side, and the fact that we're doing commentary from home. So it's crazy how much we can do with technology nowadays. And I made kind of a behind the scenes video about it and put it up on my YouTube channel. Got a lot of comments saying that, wow, how are this is how commentary happens from home nowadays. And I'm still, 1 year ago, we had to go to studios and do all this so much there's so much fuss happening to just get a commentator into the studio and whatnot, and now a commentator is sitting at home and doing commentary on the IPL. That was my first favorite moment. If I had to pick two more, it'll probably be something related to Chetan Sakaria. I really liked his performances this time. So his celebration, which I'm still trying to figure out what that celebration is, where he kind of goes Wakanda on everyone. So I'm still trying to figure out what the story behind that celebration is.
His journey in general is inspiring.
It is really cool. And was there a Yorker to AB de Villiers, or was that last year? Was that Natarajan last year?
I think that was last year.
Natarajan Yorker last year. Then after that, it's probably going to be AB de Villiers' knocks in general.
Yeah.
His performance, especially on those Chennai pitches, just really elevated him even more in IPL legend.
He doesn't seem like he's not played for an year, so like Superman in general, crazy. And so that's great. So we'd love to know more about how your childhood was like. I mean, were you always into sports? In terms of your family, like your parents, your siblings, everybody was into sports. How was that like growing up?
I have two younger brothers, and I am the most sporty person in the family. We had a little bit of sports through the family over generations. My grandmother in her time played a little bit of badminton. My dad in school played football. He was goalkeeper for the school. But I'm probably the first serious sports person in the family. We're otherwise a very academic family. My grandfather got a PhD. My grandmother in the 50s got an MSc. And back then they had an intercaste love marriage, which tells you it's a fairly progressive family that we were lucky to grow up in. So I had a lot of support in terms of what I wanted to do, or the fact that I want to go to this sport. I was being driven to that sport, or making sure that there is someone to take me there, some way for me to get there and do what I wanted to do, while at the same time everyone is telling you have to also concentrate on studies. So I kind of did both very well for a while. So it was a good childhood to be a part of. I played all sports, but cricket probably was always my favorite. And when I found that the Maharashtra team girls are practicing in Pune, where I grew up, then I started training with them, and that's when cricket kind of became serious.
Mm-hmm. So then, were you able to find a coach, who would specialize in women's cricket? Or did you have to train with the guys out there?
No, there's no such thing called specializing in women's cricket in the early 2000s. I mean, before finding this group of girls who was playing, I didn't even know that, there are girls who play cricket formally. I thought it was just, me being one of the boys playing cricket. That's how girls cricket must be. That was my first experience of playing with girls. So there was no concept of women's cricket specific coaching. In fact, because we were in the unorganized kind of space for so long without formal training, etc., we would just basically gather and train. We didn't even have formal coaching for a long time. We were just learning from our seniors. So it is very, very unorganized entry into cricket.
And then how did you make it as a career option?
Well, because we kept training together and we had a few good seniors who were basically sharing some good knowledge, we kept progressing. I kept progressing. Physically, I was gifted. I'm almost 6 feet tall. So, with a little bit of work, I became, started making more and more use of my talent. And you kept progressing because everyone is basically in the same boat. No one is got a personal coach at that point of time, or no one is doing some kind of crazy training. Only these elite athletes who are already playing at the India level, they're the only ones doing that. But otherwise, you keep progressing just by playing. That's exactly what has happened. There was no measured progress, but just by virtue of playing for a long time, the progress happened.
And then I think, started playing for Maharashtra. You remember your first match? How was the debut like? And if you were in college school, how did you balance between cricket and school or college?
So the first question was, I actually played for I was selected in the Maharashtra senior team before I played for the Maharashtra under 16 team. And I went for that tournament. We went all the way to Asansol in West Bengal.
So you were like 15, 14?
I was probably 16, yeah.
Okay,
15, 16.
Okay.
So we went to, I played 2 years of under 16. So I must have been 15. So we went all the way to Asansol in West Bengal. And harrowing journey there, my first experience of these kind of journeys, and we lost the first match and we came straight back. I didn't play in the 11. So that was an experience of, okay, this is what women's cricket is going to be like. And then I played my first under 16 tournament in Jamshedpur. We were staying in this Tata Sports Institute, which I think is part of the Jamshedpur Steel plant complex. And in the dormitories over there, one huge dormitory where all the girls are just bunking together. And in that tournament, I was really nervous and I didn't do well either. It's only when I started playing under 19 cricket and started playing matches a little regularly that I settled in, because you got to understand, this is like our first taste of organized matches. A boy who's playing under 16 cricket will have probably played 50 club matches before getting to the under 16 state level. That was my first taste of an organized tournament. Otherwise, I just played the odd match with the boys, that's all. Balancing things with school and college was fun. Like for my 10th standard board exams, I didn't play cricket for the last 3 months. Made that sacrifice, missed 1 or 2 tournaments, but it was worth it because then I got a really good score in 10th. I did a similar thing for 12th. I took science because I was definitely not going to be a commerce graduate or an arts graduate. I mean, I had the interest in science. I had the interest in, building things, taking them apart. So, which we think is engineering. So I thought, at one point I might do engineering, but despite having a good score in 12th and probably would have gotten into, if I had given the CETs, would have gotten into some engineering colleges, because ours was the first batch which had to give those CETs. But I chose not to give it because I had basically decided that I won't do engineering because I don't think it will give me enough time to play cricket, judging by, other engineering people that I was seeing. Then Shikha Pandey came along and proved that you can do both. But I chose a BSc. I chose a BSc in microbiology, and it was a pretty good course to be a part of. Even there, college support was pretty crucial because, for example, I remember in my 3rd year, I was in a Western Railway camp. By then I joined Western Railway and kind of chose to pursue cricket semi-professionally. I was in a Western Railway camp and I couldn't give my college internals, which counted towards my TY marks. So I basically took permission to come home, and on a weekend I gave all the internals. So on one day I was giving all the exams that everyone else had given over the space of 1 week. So that was crazy. But then the support of some professors, they said, "No, it's okay. You do open book tests as long as you can. As long as we know that you're reading the stuff and you're reproducing it, we're okay with that." That was one overwhelming day. I remember there was just one point where I was like going completely nuts. How am I supposed to do this? But that's how you balanced it out. I made a lot of sacrifices on the enjoying college front.
Right.
Because, it was just go to college, the practicals and the theory that you could not afford to miss, and then kind of go to practice. So it's like living 2 lives and therefore never really experiencing the college life fully. but then you're experiencing this other circle. Although I always got along better with my college friends than my cricket friends. I mean, maybe just being from an academic family, that was
Yeah.
the kind of people I was used to hanging out with. And therefore, there were only a few people in the cricket circle who I've really been able to connect with.
You're one of those rare breeds, I mean, who are exceptional at studies and acads and sports as well. I mean, usually don't resonate this with the cricketing fraternity, right? I mean, specifically in the men's cricket, I don't know, like, not a lot of people have studied a lot.
That's because in the men's cricket, it becomes very quickly evident that you can make a career in this. Even if you're, you can say you're good enough to play for Ranji Trophy, you won't play for India, you won't be in the top 15 for India, but you will be in the top 500 in India.
Yeah.
Then you can make a career out of cricket. So therefore, people prioritize at a very early age that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Whereas we don't have that option. Even if I'm playing for the state, I'm not earning any money pre-BCCI days. So therefore, we don't have the option. We have to also build backup plans.
And then gradually the India call happened. So how did that happen? Who gave you the cap and what was it like?
There was no cap presentation system in those days. In terms of who gave me the news, I found out on the internet. Rather, one of our colleagues in the cricket fraternity, she basically sent me a message saying, "Congrats." I'm like, "For what?" And she's like, check out the website, it's been announced. And that's when I saw my name was in that list. And there was no such thing as cap presentation. I do remember getting my entire kit. You get an entire box when you're in the hotel room before you're going for the tour, where you have to unpack it, and that's where I kind of saw my India cap first. So that was how it was done. It's really interesting looking back onto this age of no cap presentations with, how much of the fuss is made of cap presentations now. But
This was which year? Who was the captain? Whom against you were playing against?
this was 2008. Ali Raj is the captain. And I debuted in the Asia Cup. So we were playing against Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. I actually played my first game in India colours against Bangladesh, but that doesn't count as my debut because Bangladesh had not received ODI status until then, but they had been included in the Asia Cup so that basically they would develop and it would be good practice. But then I played my first game against Bangladesh, second game against Pakistan. So the Pakistan game counts as my debut game.
Oh wow, what a debut. This was happening in India?
No, in Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka. Okay.
And then how was the atmosphere for an India-Pakistan game back then?
Totally chill. I mean, this entire India-Pakistan narrative is completely made up on the outside. On the inside, especially in women's cricket and maybe to an extent in men's cricket also, on the inside, so you have to understand, 10 years ago, Pakistan were not competitive at all. We were like totally steamrolling them every time. So there was no rivalry, competition, tod denge unko. Aisa kuch nahi tha. They were a team that was just developing and were trying to get competitive. Now they're very competitive. So now there is a little bit of that. But even then, I mean, I've written on this as well. I've written a long read examining the India-Pakistan women's rivalry, if there is one. And it's a very small rivalry, and the narrative and the media hype about it is more than the actual tension.
Right. That's interesting to know. So you were playing. Now you're playing for India. What are the life changes that happened after that, right? In terms of training, pressure, expectation. What all changed after your debut?
So what changed was probably before my debut, where, like I mentioned, I started working for Western Railway. So I was in Pune and doing my TY BSc, having a good academic base, considering whether I want to continue with that academics wise, go to higher studies, maybe do an MBA. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that if I applied my mind to it, I could get good opportunities. But at the same time, should I be playing cricket? At the time, I had played for India under 21 in my second year of BSc. So that was still before BCCI days. Even after BCCI days, there was things were starting to pick up, but it was still not a career. So how long can I, basically expect my parents to support my game? Shouldn't I be taking higher studies seriously? Shouldn't I be planning for, what I want to do for the future. Should I take a gap year after BSc and just give cricket everything? All these questions were kind of running through my mind.
Yeah.
When this sports quota recruitment from Western Railway opened up, and I applied, I had the necessary qualifications. You have to have won XYZ tournaments previously to be able to apply for that. And then I went for the trials, and I got selected in those trials. So that happened during my third year. So I was able to make that choice to continue with cricket because now I was getting a job which was paying me to play cricket. So what it worked was from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. I had to work in the Western Railway office at Bombay Central. And from 1 p.m. onwards, I got the rest of the day off for cricket practice. So evening session, I could do cricket practice. So, and get a full salary for that kind of schedule. That was the main lifestyle change because I moved from Pune to Mumbai. I went from, living in a very comfortable home to living in Western Railway shared quarters where this one quarter had been assigned to all the cricket girls and all the cricket girls were crammed into this tiny quarter. From, having my own two-wheeler in Pune and being able to kind of transit anywhere to having to take local trains and walk to even get to practice, these huge transit times in Mumbai, even though I was lucky enough to be staying in an area which is close to where we worked and practice. Working in these government offices with this honestly really sickening atmosphere, and oh my God, they're still using dusty paper files to do all this, and that continued throughout the 9 years of my work there. So at the starting point only, I was quite clear that I'm not going to be able to do this forever. So it was just something that allowed me to do cricket. So those were the big lifestyle changes, and what helped was that Western Railway was an excellent cricket team. They were the best cricket team amongst the women's cricket other railway teams. So they had a number of India players already in their team. So suddenly going from training with the Maharashtra team where we had 2 or 3 India players to training with the Western Railway team where we had 10 or 12 India players made a big difference in my game, and therefore my the improvement was really good, and that really helped make the jump to the international level. So that was the lifestyle change, that was the circumstantial change that really probably led to an increase in my skill level.
So now we want to talk about your routine before a game. So how do you prepare for a game? How do you study the opposition and stuff? Can you walk us through that?
It varied at various points in my career, but I think it was the most organized at the end of the career when we had been in the BCCI system for a number of years. We had got some access to good quality coaches, good quality mentors who can basically guide us as to this is how it should be, etc. So I wouldn't really focus on the oppositions as much. I would focus on my skills and what the plans need to be, making sure that I have my stock ball, making sure that I have my variations well drilled. The day before, I would prefer to not do as much nets and do a little bit of spot bowling. So less time in the nets. If I bowled half an hour, I'd only like to bowl half an hour, 15 minutes in the nets and 15 minutes at spot bowling with a keeper. So I would always have to basically prepare my electrolyte drinks the night before and start hydrating the night before. The morning of the match, usually I would get up and do some meditation. But I wouldn't like to get up too early. So it would just be a short 10-minute thing. And then making sure I got to the ground and got my routine done before the game such that I was fully warmed up and on the button from ball 1. So that means bowling after the toss rather than before the toss, so that my body stays warm and those muscle movements are very clear. It means marking out my run up with tape the day before if I have access to the ground, making those markings there so I don't have to worry about it. And then just trying to be as relaxed as possible going into that first ball.
Yeah, got it. So you had a debut against Pakistan and Sri Lanka. You played Asia Cup. I think you played a bunch of matches and then you got dropped for the first time from the team, right? So what went through your mind when you were dropped from the team?
Let's see. I played the 2009 World Cup and then I got dropped, which was harsh because I didn't play a single game in the World Cup, and then I got dropped. So we had a kind of a selection tournament before that, and while I didn't do well in that selection tournament, I mean there is grounds to say that if you haven't got an opportunity at the international level, a consistent opportunity at the international level in the previous tournament, could have continued. So that was basically the first time when I realized that if you're playing for your place, you won't play well. Because in the selection tournament, I'm constantly aware of the fact, oh my God, I didn't play in the World Cup. Now, if I don't do well here, I might not play. And that thought just poisons your performance. So it was a learning experience in saying that how, if you think about those things, you're not going to be able to do well in the place where you need to do well. And that was, then after that, I had to take that lesson on board and just play for the sake of playing, focus on the process and all those cliches. But that is actually what helps and actually what works. And then work my way back into the team through good performances.
But then it's so difficult, as in like there's so much pressure. I mean, you yourself might have some anxieties and stuff. So how did you deal with all those?
It was a constant struggle. Like even for example, I did the Asia Cup first, then went to England. I had a back injury issue in England, so then you have to come back. You have to basically prove your fitness again. Then I worked through that, got my fitness up to a good level. I had again a challenger tournament where I had to prove that I'm back despite being in the Indian team in the previous tour. I had to basically prove that I'm doing well. So again, there's a tournament there where I did well, then held on to my place. So it's a constant state of anxiety and insecurity. What would have been great in this kind of situation is contracts, because we had no contracts. So I was getting my Western Railway salary and I was getting paid tour fees whenever I went to tour with India. Just, one lump sum amount whenever you go on tour. But if I don't go on tour, I'm suddenly not getting that money.
Okay.
So then I have to basically rely on, I was still lucky enough to be having a salary. Not all those, not every player in domestic circuit has that, but there's no certainty. Because with that salary also means you have to devote half your time to these office duties, which was always a conflict. So are you able to put in 100% into getting your place back into the Indian team? Once you get your place back, are you basically secure in that place? Those struggles were always there. That culture of insecurity. On top of that, Indian women's selections were notoriously arbitrary.
So that's one thing that you want to change if given a chance. What's missing in the women's cricket right now, like since you're playing days versus now?
One thing that I would change is make domestic cricket more incentivized.
Okay.
Like we have a wide base, and I would maybe keep the same kind of incentives that there are to play state cricket, because now the girls get paid a decent amount of money to play state games. But what I would do is heavily incentivize the upper levels.
Right.
So if you have your state games, then you have your interzonals and your challenger, and then women's IPL whenever it happens. Make all those steps increasingly incentivized. If you get selected for your zone, your match fees are double. If you get selected for challenger, your match fees are triple. My generation played without financial incentives. But if we create those financial incentives, it will definitely help. And right now, it's domestic cricket who needs the finances. The Indian women's cricket team is well financed.
Right.
I would love to expand it to more contracts than we have right now. But the girls who are getting contracts are getting a decent amount of money. It's domestic
with
cricket
IPL also. I mean, that's helping.
Well, the IPL is just an exhibition tournament right now. So there's no real IPL. It's just that exhibition tournament which is called the Women's T20 Challenge. So that's IPL would be part of the domestic structure that I would really change on a priority basis.
Also, you wrote an article stating like transparency is the need of the hour in BCCI in women's cricket. So like, what's missing in BCCI right now?
It's a simple thing, right? Like after a selection, whether it's men, women, after a selection is declared, why not have a press conference with the chief selector explaining your choices? Because then that removes this arbitrariness from the system, because women's cricket and men's cricket is now in the eye of the public, and there is so much media conversation happening about it that you can't get away with arbitrary selections. If you have to explain why X player is selected and this selector says she's a good player, but then you can come back and say her stats are XYZ. So there is just a little bit of accountability for what's happening. And just the simple act of having a press conference and opening yourself up to the media, what it'll do is it'll create a lot of divided opinion between the fans, There'll be people,
Yeah.
this one should have been there, that one should have been there.
Yeah.
3D players should not be there. It'll
Yeah.
create those
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah.
But
Which is
what
very important.
happens, you'll get different opinions and you'll get a lot of arguments in the fans about it. But what happens if you don't have that transparency and arbitrariness is that fans will turn off.
Yeah.
You won't have fans
Totally.
at all. You'll start losing fans.
Yeah. I think that's how you engage fans, and that's how the game grows, right? I mean, it's totally stupid if you do it otherwise. I think similarly, I think Ramesh Pawar being appointed as a coach again, right? He had a situation, I think, in his previous gig as well, right? And I think there was no specific reason why he got appointed and stuff, right? I think that again, that is also one point I am sure you're trying to cover through this article, right? I'm assuming.
I mean, see, like I said in the article, both Ramesh Pawar and both W.V. Raman have had good coaching credentials. Both have done good work in the Indian team in the times they've been there. They've both been there for short times, relatively.
Yeah.
So, what is the reason for changing the coach? Which is not to say that Ramesh Pawar is a bad coach or a bad choice for the Indian team, which is not to say that W.V. Raman was a bad choice for the Indian team. But the processes, that's what I wrote in the article. It's not about the decisions. It's about the processes by which those decisions are made. What are these processes? Can we know? Are we allowed to know? Are we allowed to ask?
And apart from that, how do you think how different is actually women's cricket from the men's?
It needs to be more different, is what I would say. So where the administration and the current setup seem to be in a places that जो men's के लिए है वो women's के लिए रहने दो, उससे ज़्यादा जैसा चल रहा है वैसे चलने दो. So for example, men don't have a national under-16 competition. You have a zonal under-16 competition. Okay. And therefore for women's cricket also, we've not had a national under-16 competition since 2006. Before 2006, when the Women's Cricket Association of India, a body which had a fraction of the funds, ran women's cricket, we had an under-16 competition. I played my first tournaments in under-16, like I told you guys. And therefore, we can still develop, we can still debut players, Smriti Mandhana, Deepti Sharma, who are 17 years old. So if you're 17-year-old are good enough to play for the country, I think you should be having an under-16 competition. The point is that because the men don't have a national under-16 competition, they've never really kind of considered it for the women. The difference is that the men's under-16 competition is a 4-day tournament. Or if I'm not right, if I'm not wrong, it's a 4-day or a 2-day tournament. It's basically a first-class format tournament where you have multi-innings matches. So even though the boys are playing these under-16 tournaments in their zone, they're high-quality cricket matches. Okay. Women's matches are played only in T20 and ODI format, and if you don't play them at the under-16 level nationally, you're missing out.
Yeah.
And is that the reason why there are literally no test matches for women?
No, that's a different conversation. So just sticking with this point here is that if you basically apply the same formula for men, you won't always get good results. One of the approaches that we took to a report that we launched on women's cricket called the Equal Hue report was different but equal. So you have to give them the equal respect, treatment, equal intention of wanting to grow the game, but use different approaches. So that report is basically co-authored by myself and a couple of friends in the media, analyzing the state of the game right now and inviting participation, inviting progress from all stakeholders. So it's a report aimed at anyone who wants to get involved with women's cricket at any stakeholder angle. They can use this report as a resource. Now when it comes to test matches, a lot of countries like New Zealand, for example, officially have a policy where we won't play test matches because we think that T20 and ODI are the best route to grow the women's game. And fair enough, you have limited amount of funds, you want to put them into the most engaging formats. I completely understand. So those are the kind of conversations why test cricket isn't played at the international level because of the cost-benefit ratio. Luckily, we are a board that doesn't really have to worry about cost as much as other boards. And it's good to see that more and more tests are being talked about in the Indian women's schedules now. We're going to be playing 2 test matches this year. And I would love for that to become a regular feature that for every touring team, whoever comes to India, we also invite them to play a test match.
Absolutely.
And also like this, wrapping up this conversation a bit, I mean, for you, especially as a woman cricketer, what sacrifices did you have to make that a men's cricketer would not have to make?
I think the sacrifices are fairly similar to what all other sports people who are not playing men's cricket make. Because in terms of the lifestyle that you have, in terms of the rewards that you get for the amount of work you put in. If you look at, for example, being in Western Railway, I was training alongside volleyball players, hockey players, kabaddi players, and they were making the same kind of sacrifices as us. They were having the same kind of lifestyle, and even they resented us to an extent because still women's cricket is more lucrative than what they get in their states for or in their sports for playing for the country or playing for the state. For them, kind of a railway job is one of the best things that they can aspire to because you have that security all your life.
Right.
Whereas for women's cricket now, we are in a point where some of these cricketers are choosing not to take up jobs. Smriti Mandhana does not have a railway job. She doesn't need a railway job because she's earning so much. Your younger generation of players now can choose to not take a railway job. So for my generation, where women's cricket is still not mainstream and not a professional option, I retired in 2015 and contracts for the Indian team came in 2015. So for my generation, the sacrifices were the lifestyle that we had to choose. We had to put in the equal amount of effort that today's generation is putting in, but we didn't get the kind of returns that they got. But from my side, there's no resentment. From my side, there is a feeling that now this crop of girls has to get the best, which is why I'm constantly kind of advocating for them through my work, through my writing, through my commentary. And trying to make sure that they get the best of what is available to them now so that the next generations have a much higher standard to aspire to.
Also, it's almost like starting a new career at the age of 28. So what sort of skills did you have to acquire at that age? I mean, to write good stuff, to produce good content. So what did you do?
So the biggest skill acquisition curve was for YouTube. I had been writing a blog a little bit, so I had some very basic writing skills. And the more I wrote, the kind of better I got at that. But when it came to YouTube video creation, I had zero idea. So I just saw a few YouTube videos. I thought this will be interesting to do. And I started doing it. I had to teach myself how to use a camera, teach myself how to script things, teach myself how to plan shoots. And the biggest curve was teach myself how to edit, because for the first 2.5-3 years, I edited my own videos. So basically going onto YouTube, watching YouTube videos about how to edit YouTube videos was some of the skill acquisition that I had to pick up. I did more and more, as I did more and more writing, started interacting and speaking to different writers, got advice from them, improved my writing skills. And this entire thing really helped me portray the knowledge that I had in a very nice way.
I think you're doing some fantastic work on your YouTube channel. I think you have more than 260 odd subscribers. And there is a specific, a friend of mine is into cricket, like his younger brother, right? So I think that specific piece when at batting basics, right? How to grip the bat, how to play that front foot defense and stuff, right? I think you've done a series on that. I think that's really engaging, and I think within a short span of time, I think you've garnered YouTube channel has some recognition now, right? People relate to it, specifically aspiring cricketers, right? So I think kudos to you on that.
Thank you. So now I'm trying to expand that, especially through lockdown last year. I've built out an entire course on batting basics, and people who are interested in learning deeper with me. The intention essentially is to narrow the gap. The same with YouTube, narrow the gap between people who want to learn cricket and don't have coaches nearby. I have students in my programs from places I've never heard of. Literally, there's some place called Mahendragarh in Haryana. I have never heard of this place. There's a couple of places in UP, these tier 3 towns, where there are students basically who are watching my YouTube and they've enrolled in my programs, and now they're basically in touch with me on a regular basis if they have any doubts. So I think the power of the internet to kind of break down these boundaries is pretty awesome.
Totally.
And also, there's so much cricketing content on YouTube as well. So how did you scale to get 260k subscribers?
It was by accident, so to speak. I started doing cricket vlogs. The idea was, let's talk about cricket, but let's do it in an outdoor setting because I'm an outdoorsy person. Go for a trek, talk about cricket while on the trek, film it and release it. I did 3-4 videos like that. Then I said, chalo, let's try and go to a cricket shop and talk about cricket, about how to do a particular skill. So rather than talk about cricket, rather than current affairs, I accidentally made a video on a how to, and that video took off. You know, in a week's time, suddenly I have like 3,000-4,000 subscribers. I'm like, ye kahan se aa rahe? So then I realized that this is what people want to do, how to, and therefore I decided to really focus on the how to content, and that picked up, and that's helped me grow.
And you did mention a bit about cricket commentary, right? So and now IPL also happened. I think you did commentary in Marathi, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
How do you prepare for a match? And I mean, is there a certain amount of sync up that you have to do with your fellow commentators and stuff? Like, how does the preparation side of things work in commentary?
So the maximum work that you see, commentary is totally the tip of the iceberg. Maximum amount of work that you see, which you can see on the commentary on the broadcast, is the ease with which you can do commentary. Now that ease is built up through, for 1 day of commentary, 3 days of research. So really familiarizing yourself with the background stories, the stats that matter, taking the effort to try and speak to these cricketers, speak to their parents. That's where all my journalism training really came in handy, because first thing you do is pick up the phone and find out this person's story. And luckily, having played with and against a lot of the women's cricketers, I can do that on the women's cricket circuit. If I can't do it on the men's circuit, I'll always call up friends who know more about men's cricket, or who have access to the men's cricketers, and I'll ask them about the players. So I had a document which had about, I think at last count, 20,000 words on it, which was my preparatory document for the commentary for the India-South Africa women's series that I was commentating on, and that had just 2 teams. So with these bigger tournaments like IPL, the research is a never-ending process.
That's insane.
Yeah. And also, like, just summarizing, like, with all this you have learned, I mean, all these things have changed now. So how differently would you approach your game with this new knowledge?
My game, as in if I was a player?
Yes, as a player, or maybe as a, or even as a writer, or as a content creator.
Writer, content creator, I keep working in my new knowledge into my new content. I'm starting to talk more and more about the process of skill acquisition, biomechanics. As I learn more and more about those topics, I'm in the middle of doing a level 2 coaching course with the NCA. So the more I learn about those topics, the more you'll see it appearing in my writing and my coaching content creation. But in a sense that I wish that, with the exposure that I've got now because of media, because of social media also, I would definitely have definitely the cricketers that are in the current generation, they have a huge opportunity because they have this access to this knowledge. Now these cricketers can call up and take the help of coaches, and they can hire coaches from England, they can hire coaches from Australia, they can hire coaches from all over India, which is the same thing that I'm doing for young aspiring cricketers. So the elite cricketers now can do that at a much higher level. So that is what I would definitely do differently, invest in a lot of the knowledge that is available for development.
Got it. I'm following you on Twitter for quite some time now. So I remember, I think that was when you started covering a lot of domestic matches and stuff, right? Which was never happened, I think.
Yeah. That was the time where domestic cricket was getting zero coverage.
Yeah.
And even when I was playing, I was writing blogs about what's happening on the domestic circuit. So that has always been an intention. So that intention can be expressed in different ways. It can be expressed through continuing work in the media and broadcast, and just raising the profile through visibility, or it can be expressed through actually doing work on the ground in the administration. So that intention will remain the same. Whatever opportunities open up, I'm happy to take them.
Perfect. I think let's move to the final session, which is the rapid fire question. I mean, enough of heavy talks. I mean, whatever comes to your mind, just go for it, right?
Sure.
Your favorite IPL team?
Sunrisers.
3 female cricketers to look out for?
Well, Shafali Verma is the obvious one.
Yeah.
There are a couple of fast bowlers, one from Vidarbha and one from Jharkhand, who you should be looking out for. They'll probably be making the cut very soon.
According to you, what was a pivoting movement for women's cricket in India when actually like everybody got into it?
No doubt about that. That's the Harmanpreet's 171 in the semi-final. That just woke up a nation to women's cricket, and the interest has been high ever since.
Your best sporting memory?
Beating Railways in a domestic match, playing for Maharashtra in a super over where
Oh, wow.
I bowled the final over.
Oh wow! And you were defending how much?
I was defending 20 thanks to
Okay.
Smriti Mandana.
Okay.
We played for the same team.
Uh-huh.
She
Nice.
batted first in the super over and she smashed it
Yeah,
and made
yeah.
my job easy.
Nice. Your favorite writer?
Initially, I loved Rohit Brijnath's work. Siddharth Monga's work is really good. Jared Kimber has been awesome for a long time. Sharda is really good. My colleague Karunya Keshav writes some really punching pieces on women's cricket. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a good mix.
Yeah. Your favorite interview?
It's an interesting one. The interview that I conducted.
Yeah.
Probably Alex Blackwell during the 2016 Women's Big Bash when I was there covering that tournament. It was a very candid and a very deep interview. So that was probably my favorite one. Also, one of my favorite cricketers. She's an awesome cricketer, an awesome person in general.
Lovely. One last question. So, if you have to pick between writing and making videos,
Yikes, that's a tough one. I would probably pick writing.
okay. Seems like that. I mean, that was your first love, right? I mean, since you were writing when you were playing cricket as well, right?
Yeah, I've been doing that for the longest time, and it's probably the place where I feel like I can make a lot of impact in terms of being one of the only female cricketers who is writing consistently. It's not just important with what I say, but the fact that I'm there, visible, and saying it also, I think, makes an impact.
So that's it from the podcast, Neil. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode with Snehal. Do check out her Instagram handle, Cricket with Snehal and Equal You, which is a report on growing women's cricket in India. You can check links for both in the description below. And lastly, please subscribe to Nails and Hammers on YouTube or any other platform where you listen to this podcast.